The sound the machine made wasn't loud, but it cut. Beep. Your card has been declined. Byron froze. Not confused, not yet. Just paused, like a man whose body hasn't caught up to the fact that something irreversible just happened. That's wrong, he said automatically, smooth, confident. Try it again. The agent didn't argue. She tapped the screen. Calm, professional, detached, beep, declined. The word didn't echo in the airport, but it echoed inside him. I could see it. And the way his shoulders squared a little too tightly. The way his jaw locked like pride was trying to physically hold the world together. Cambria shifted beside him. Her birthday outfit was soft cream, expensive linen, carefully styled hair. She had already posted the airport champagne photo to her stories before security. She did not like disruption. This account shows authorized user privileges were removed, the agent added evenly. Revoked yesterday. Revoked yesterday. And the word landed like a hand on Byron's chest. Cambria's eyes turned slowly toward him. Not dramatic, not loud, just slow. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. That was the exact second he understood. I was standing 3 steps behind them. Quiet. Still. Watching the truth unfold without lifting a finger. Let me tell you something about humiliation. It doesn't start with shouting. It starts with silence. The agent asked, "Are you the primary account holder?" Byron hesitated, and that hesitation lasted less than a second, but it told the whole story. "No," he said. "Then you'll need to contact the primary holder." Behind them, the line grew restless. A man glanced at his watch. A woman shifted her carry-on forward. Someone whispered. Cambria's breathing changed, tiny, controlled. She leaned slightly toward Byron. "Fix it," she whispered. He tried another card. Beep. Declined. The third sound was the one that stripped him, because now it wasn't a glitch. It was exposure. "My name is Yvelle Harding. I am Byron Harding's mother. And 3 days ago, I heard my daughter-in-law call me a burden. Not in anger, not in frustration, casually, like I was excess baggage. Byron didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't even shift in his seat. He let the word sit there, and I let it sit in me. If you're watching this right now, tell me what time it is where you are. And I want to know who's awake when a woman decides she will no longer finance disrespect." Back at the counter, the agent's tone never changed. "Do you have another form of payment for the baggage fees?" Byron didn't answer her. He stared at me. "Ma," he said quietly. That word used to mean protection. Today it sounded like panic. Cambria followed his gaze and finally noticed I was close enough to hear every syllable the agent had spoken. Her expression shifted. Not apology, calculation. "How you did this?" Byron asked under his breath. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I held his eyes and said nothing. Because silence can say what speech is ruin. 3 days ago, I listened to my daughter-in-law say, if his mother stopped hovering with money, we'd actually be independent. Hovering, burden, excess, and my son chose comfort over correction. The agent cleared the screen. Beep, transaction canceled. Cambria folded her arms. Byron swallowed. And I reached slowly into my purse. At the same time, his phone lit up. Incoming call. Mom. He looked down at it like it was a verdict, then back up at me. And that was the moment he realized this wasn't a system error, it was a decision. The flashback began there. The screen of my phone lit my kitchen in a cold, unforgiving way, and my reflection in it looked older than it had the day before, like the light was telling the truth my mirrors had been sparing me. I didn't touch anything yet. I just sat there with my shoulders squared, listening to the quiet inside my house, letting the silence settle back into its rightful place after all that noise. Then I let my mind slide backward to where the weight really began. 3 days before Cambria's birthday, when my name was used like something heavy somebody wanted to put down. It happened in their condo, in that clean, staged space they called theirs, or the one with pale pillows and untouched coasters and framed prints that looked like they came from a catalog. I had stopped by with a small envelope of documents I'd asked Byron to sign. Nothing dramatic, just renewal forms for the insurance premium I still covered because he always said he was about to switch it over. Cambria opened the door with that practiced brightness, the kind that feels more like customer service than welcome. "Miss Avell," she said, and leaning in for a quick hug that didn't warm her eyes. Her perfume was expensive and sharp, like it had something to prove. Byron was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, laughing softly at something I couldn't hear. He saw me and lifted 2 fingers in a wave, like I was a familiar background item in his life. Cambria took the envelope from my hand and held it between 2 manicured fingers, as if paper itself might smudge her. "You didn't have to bring that over," she said sweetly. "Now you could have emailed." I smiled because I've been a woman long enough to understand the little ways people try to reposition you without raising their voice. "I wanted to make sure it didn't get lost," I said, and she nodded, still smiling, as if my care was a harmless habit. I didn't come to stay, I didn't sit down. I just stepped into the living room long enough to set my purse on the arm of a chair and to glance at the place the way a mother does, checking what her child won't admit needs checking. My eyes caught the mail stacked neatly on the counter. A mortgage statement sat on top, flipped upside down like a secret. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Not because I'm nosy, because I know my own handwriting when it's on a check. And I know the shape of my own generosity when it's been folded into someone else's independence. Byron's laugh rose again from the kitchen, and I heard Cambria's voice behind me. Lower now, the sweetness peeled away. She wasn't speaking to me. She thought I was too far to hear, too polite to listen. "I can't wait until after my birthday," she said, voice light like gossip. "Dubai, the whole thing. I swear I need that break." A pause. Then another voice. One of her friends, I think. Tinny through a speaker. "Girl, you deserve it. Your man's doing it big." Cambria made a small sound, half laugh, half sigh. "He's trying," she said. "But you know." Her words slowed, and when she said my name, it was like she set it down on the table with 2 fingers, careful not to dirty herself. His mother is a burden sometimes, always hovering with money like it's a leash. The word didn't hit me like a slap. It hit like something dull and heavy dropped in a quiet room. Burden. Not difficult. Not complicated. Burden. The kind of word you use when you're tired of carrying something you never earned in the first place. My throat tightened, but I didn't move. I didn't announce myself. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there with my hand resting on the back of a chair, feeling the blood throb behind my ears. Cambria kept talking, casual as breathing. "He can't say no to her," she went on. "She pays the credit card every month like clockwork. Like she covers the insurance premiums, she even helps with the condo note, and then she acts like we're supposed to be grateful forever." She laughed, and that laugh had no joy in it. Just relief at saying the ugly part out loud. "It's exhausting," she added, like, "let us live." The friend murmured something in agreement, and Cambria's tone sharpened just a touch, polite cruelty wrapped in pretty words. "After Dubai," she said, "things are changing." Byron's footsteps approached, and I could hear the soft shuffle of his socks on tile. He came into the living room still holding his phone, and Cambria's voice immediately brightened again, like she'd flipped a switch. "Baby," she sang, "your mom's here." Byron glanced at me, smile easy, and in that single second, I saw it. He had heard enough to know what she'd been saying. Not the whole sentence, maybe, but the tone, the disrespect, the way my name sat wrong in her mouth. He didn't correct her. He didn't look ashamed, and he just kissed her cheek and said, "Hey, Ma, like nothing in the room had shifted. And that was the moment my hurt stopped being soft. That was the moment it sharpened into something that could cut clean. I picked up my purse, smiled once, and told them I had errands. Cambria hugged me again, tighter this time, like she could hug the truth back into hiding. Byron walked me to the door, still too quiet, still too careful. On the drive home, my hand stayed steady on the wheel, but inside me, something began to list itself, item by item, like a woman finally turning her feelings into facts. When I got back to my kitchen, I didn't pray for peace. I didn't call a friend. I opened my laptop, pulled up my accounts, and started searching the last 12 months, one charge at a time. By the time the sun came up, my kitchen table had become a courtroom, and I was the only judge willing to hear the whole truth. Not the soft version I told myself when Byron was younger, not the hopeful version I clung to when Cambria started calling me Miss Yvelle, with that rehearsed sweetness, the full version. I sat there in my robe with my hair wrapped tight, a glass of water sweating onto a coaster, my laptop open like an open wound. I didn't scroll like a curious woman. I scrolled like a woman collecting evidence. Every line item carried a memory. Now, and the worst part was how ordinary the numbers looked. Small charges that added up to a life they performed as if it was theirs alone. The first thing I did was pull up the credit account Byron had been living on like it was his birthright. 2 years ago, he'd come to my house with that familiar mix of pride and humility, the one he used when he wanted help without feeling small. When he'd said he needed a card for emergencies, because their condo expenses were temporary tight and Cambria's business was still stabilizing. He promised me he'd only use it for travel and the occasional thing, and he promised me he'd pay it down. I remember signing him on as an authorized user right there at my kitchen counter, my pen moving steady, my heart moving softer than my head. I told myself it was mothering. I told myself it was support. I didn't tell myself it was the beginning of him forgetting the difference between help and access. Now, with the account pulled up in front of me, I could see the shape of that forgetting. The account was in my name, always had been. I was the primary holder. I controlled the limits, the settings, the alerts. I controlled who could spend. Byron's name sat there beneath mine like a footnote, and that footnote had been living like a headline. I clicked through the statements month by month, one in each one read like a quiet story I'd been paying for without demanding the ending. Grocery deliveries on weeks I knew they hosted, a car service charged at midnight, dining tabs that weren't anniversary dinners, just Tuesday nights dressed up like celebration. There were charges for boutique stores with names that sounded like whispers, the kind of purchases people make when they want to feel like someone else. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I didn't slam my laptop. I didn't gasp. And I wrote things down. I opened a clean notebook and started a list the way my own mother taught me to, line by line, neat, with dates that didn't care about feelings. When I got to the payments, that's where my stomach tightened. Every month, on the same day, my auto pay cleared the balance. Not because Byron had sent money, because I had said it that way. And I could hear Cambria's voice in my head saying, like clockwork. And the fact that she was right made my jaw clench harder than the insult itself. I pulled up my insurance account next, the one Byron had never bothered to transfer even after he got promoted. The premium was still tied to my bank draft. The condo note I'd helped with, only a portion just enough to ease pressure, Byron had said, showed up as a recurring transfer on the same schedule. I stared at that number for a long time, not because I regretted helping, but because I was finally seeing the full map of what my help had built. It didn't build gratitude. It built dependence dressed up as independence. Then I opened the travel section because Dubai wasn't just a destination in Cambria's mouth. It was a symbol. Byron loved travel the way some people love applause. He liked the way an upgraded seat made him look like a man who had arrived. He liked the lounge not for the snacks, but for the quiet separation, of the velvet rope feeling without the rope, and he had been borrowing that feeling from me. My airline loyalty account sat under my name, not his. Lifetime elite. Years of disciplined travel and careful spending and long work trips that weren't glamorous when I was living them. I controlled it because I earned it, and I maintained it because I understood how quickly people try to inherit what they didn't build. Byron had benefited from it for 2 years the same way he'd benefited from my card, by proximity. He didn't hold the status. He traveled beside it. I clicked into the rewards portal and my throat went dry. The points balance was lower than it should have been. Redemptions showed up like footprints across my screen. Miles used, certificates applied, upgrades processed. It wasn't illegal. It was worse. It was familiar. It was my own generosity being moved around like furniture in a house they were already calling theirs. I could see the pattern clearly now. When Byron wanted to impress Cambria, he reached for what he knew would work. My benefits, my points, my quiet backing. Then he wore the result like it came from his own pocket. I sat back in my chair and let the air leave my lungs slowly, not in shock, but in recognition. I had been funding more than a lifestyle. I had been funding a story. And stories like that don't end until the person paying decides to stop. My hand hovered over the next tab, the one that would show me exactly where those redemptions had gone, and I felt something harden inside me, clean, cold, and steady. I clicked it open, and the confirmation email that loaded on my screen made the room feel suddenly smaller. The confirmation email opened like a curtain being pulled back on a stage I didn't know I was financing. Dubai. Bold letters, clean itinerary. My dates wrapped neatly around Cambria's birthday like the trip itself was a ribbon. For a moment, I just stared, not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I did. Too well. I could see Byron's hands in it. The way he loved a grand gesture that didn't come with a grand bill. I could see Cambria's hunger in it, too, the kind that doesn't ask, it assumes. And sitting there in my quiet kitchen with my laptop humming, and I realized something that tightened my spine. They hadn't planned a vacation. They had planned a performance. I clicked through the details slowly, the way you read something when you already feel the ending, but you need the proof anyway. The flights were economy, purchased months ago, far enough back that the price would have been reasonable. That part was smart. That part sounded like Byron, careful enough to pretend he was responsible. Then I saw the upgrade request stamped across the booking like a greedy fingerprint. 2 international upgrade certificates applied, approved, cleared to business class, my certificates. The ones I earned through years of loyalty and long-haul flights when nobody was clapping for me, when my reward was simply getting home without being too exhausted to function. Byron had asked for the upgrade the way a child asks for dessert, confident it would appear if he waited long enough. And I had applied them weeks ago before I knew what I was standing inside. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, not to calm down, but to steady the part of me that wanted to turn this into emotion. Emotion makes you sloppy. I couldn't afford sloppy. When I reopened my eyes, I kept reading. The lounge access was tied to my lifetime elite status. Not his, mine. Certain benefits only apply when the status holder is traveling. Byron didn't have the status. He had proximity. He'd been walking through airports with the kind of quiet privilege that comes from being attached to someone else's name. Then I saw the hotel. 5-star, suite. The kind people post without showing the invoice. And right beside it, my travel portal benefit. Booked under my profile. Guaranteed with my card. He hadn't gotten her the suite. He had accessed it. And underneath that booking sat my masked card number. Not because I volunteered, not because I was asked. Because access had become assumption. I didn't feel anger, I felt clarity. I didn't cancel the trip. I didn't touch the flights. What I touched were the privileges attached to my name. There is a difference. I opened my loyalty account first, The remaining points were transferred back into my sole redemption control. Then I canceled the upgrade certificates. Quiet clicks, clean confirmations. The system notified me the reservation would revert to its original fare class. I accepted. Not dramatic, just policy. Next, I logged into my credit account. Byron's name sat beneath mine as an authorized user. Removing an authorized user isn't loud. It's a few buttons and a confirmation that asks if you're certain. I was certain. I removed him and immediately requested a new primary card number. That step matters. When the primary number changes, stored payment methods fail automatically. It isn't revenge, it's containment. Then I returned to the hotel booking. Because it was reserved through my portal, I could modify it under the flexible rate terms. I downgraded the suite to a standard refundable room and adjusted the guarantee so payment would be required at property under his own card. No perks, no credits, no shadow benefits tied to my name. They could still go, they just couldn't go on me. Within minutes, confirmation emails began arriving. Upgrade canceled, benefits removed, authorized user access revoked, new card issued. Each one time-stamped. Each one immediate. I closed my laptop gently, and I made one decision very carefully. I would not warn them, not tonight, not at dinner, not until the system spoke for me. 3 days before her birthday, she called me a burden. I chose to become unavailable instead. My phone buzzed on the counter. Byron's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. After I closed my laptop, and I sat there a long moment with my hands folded like I was waiting for someone to burst into my kitchen and accuse me of being cruel. No one came. The house stayed still. That's the thing about boundaries. When you finally put them in place, the world doesn't shake. Only your nerves do. My phone buzzed again. Byron. Another message. I didn't open it. I wasn't ready to let his words steer my hands back into softness. Not yet. Not until my actions were complete and my heart could no longer negotiate with what my mind already understood. I opened my banking app again, not to undo anything, not to revisit the travel decisions. This time, I was looking at the parts of my life that never showed up in photographs, the invisible scaffolding. The first thing I did was scroll through recurring charges, a streaming subscription in Byron's name, a toll pass refill tied to his car, or an insurance premium I had been covering temporarily. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when no one challenges it. I removed each one slowly. Click, confirm, click, confirm. The app offered polite warnings about service interruptions. I stared at those warnings and thought about what Cambria had said, how my money felt like a leash. If my support was a leash, then I was finally letting it fall to the floor. Next, I opened the condo transfer. On the monthly support I had labeled just until things stabilize. It was scheduled to go out in 3 days. I stared at the number long enough to remember every reason I'd justified it. He's building. He's figuring it out. It won't always be like this. Then I canceled the next transfer. Not forever, not out of rage, but until he could look me in the eye and tell me whether I was a burden or the foundation he'd been standing on. My finger didn't tremble when I confirmed it. And the app didn't ask about emotion. It asked about authority. I had it. Then I moved to digital access, shared logins, secondary email notifications, backup contacts that had quietly included his address for convenience. Convenience is how boundaries erode. I removed shared access from financial dashboards, changed passwords, updated security settings, set alerts to come only to me. Not because I feared theft, because I refused assumption. I wasn't cutting him off from survival. I was cutting him off from invisibility. The difference matters. When I finished, my inbox filled with confirmations. Recurring payment removed, transfer canceled, access updated, effective immediately. I didn't rush through those emails. I read them. Each one was a small acknowledgement that ownership and generosity are not the same thing. I didn't reopen the travel accounts. I didn't revisit the upgrades. That work was done. This was different. And this was about the parts of my life that had become so routine, no one thought to thank me for them. I set my phone face down again and listened to my breathing slow. Then I flipped it over, not to read Byron's messages, but to check the timestamps on everything I had just done. Clear, final, immediate. And in that quiet kitchen, I understood something I should have recognized years ago. It's not the visible luxuries that create entitlement. It's the quiet, monthly support no one ever sees. When the next time Byron reached for what he thought was automatic, the system wouldn't argue. It would simply answer him with absence. By the time Cambria's birthday dinner arrived, the house I sat in felt like it belonged to a different woman than the one they were celebrating. I moved through my day with a steadiness that surprised me, as if my body had already accepted what my heart was still trying to name. When Byron texted the address, it wasn't warm. It was efficient. A location. A time. On a small celebration emoji that looked like it had been added out of obligation. I arrived on schedule, dressed the way I always dress when I step into a room where people expect me to play my role. Pressed, composed, unbothered. The restaurant was dim in that expensive way that smooths everything. Plates small, prices large, staff soft-spoken, as if we were fragile. Cambria loved places like that. It made everything feel elevated, even silence. And her friends were already gathered, a circle of perfume, laughter, and raised glasses. When Cambria stood to greet me, she did it with bright, practiced affection, the kind she switches on in public like a ring light. "Miss Yvelle," she said, hugging me longer than necessary. Her cheek brushed mine. I felt the smile pressed into that hug, pretty, controlled, hollow in the center. "You look beautiful," she added, just loud enough for the table to hear. And a few of her friends nodded toward me politely, like I was a donor at a fundraiser. Byron slid into the seat beside her, close enough to look devoted. He looked sharp. He always did when there was something to display. His watch caught the candlelight. His cologne arrived before he did. He stood, kissed my cheek briefly, and sat back down like he had checked off an obligation. He didn't hold my eyes long. That small avoidance said more than any apology could have. The night moved with the rhythm of performance. Compliments, laughter, phones raised to photograph plates before anyone tasted them. Cambria soaked it in, letting the room orbit her. "30 looks good on you," someone joked. She laughed, even though she wasn't 30. Truth mattered less than glow. At one point, the server leaned in and asked what we were celebrating. "My birthday," Cambria said sweetly. "And a little trip," Byron added quickly, unable to resist. Cambria's eyes brightened. "Dubai." The word floated across the table like a brand name. Oohs, smiles, impressed murmurs. Cambria leaned back as if applause was expected. My fork moved slowly. I listened. When someone called me such a supportive mother, I smiled politely. Supportive, burden, same mouth, different rooms. Then Byron turned toward me, casual as commenting on the weather. "Thanks for clearing the upgrades." Light, easy, public. His eyes stayed on his plate as he said it. Cambria's smile tightened, just for half a breath. So small no one else would notice. I noticed. I nodded once. I didn't respond. I didn't correct him. I didn't give him language to hide behind. I let the sentence sit there, thin and sharp, until Cambria laughed and redirected attention to the dress she planned to wear, over there. The rest of dinner felt subtly different after that, not outwardly. Outwardly, it remained sweet, but underneath, something had shifted. Cambria's compliments toward me became more deliberate, more performative. Byron drank less than usual. His thumb tapped his phone under the table twice. Quick glances, quick hides. When dessert arrived, the candle flickered in front of her. Everyone sang. Cambria closed her eyes and made a wish with the confidence of someone who believed the future was already secured. Byron kissed her forehead gently. "To you," he said, lifting his glass. Then, with easy pride, he added, "Now Dubai is going to be unforgettable." I smiled, and I let him believe everything was still intact. I did not touch a single reservation that night. I did not log into anything. I waited. 3 days before her birthday, she called me a burden. On her birthday, I let them celebrate. The morning after would belong to me. Departure morning arrived dressed in champagne energy, even though the sun hadn't fully decided what kind of day it wanted to be. The sky outside my bedroom window was pale, washed in gray, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. I woke before my alarm, not because I was excited for them, but because my body had been on alert for days, like it refused to sleep through the first crack of thunder. My house was quiet. No heels on hardwood, no suitcase wheels dragging across tile. Just a kettle humming and the steady thump of my own heart, the same rhythm that had been keeping time since I heard that word in Cambria's mouth. Burden. I moved slowly through my kitchen, making tea I didn't need. My phone rested face down on the counter. I could have turned it over and watched their morning unfold in real time. Airport selfies, birthday captions, luxury framed as effortlessness. I didn't. Instead, I let my mind paint the scene across town. Byron would already be awake, and he liked control, especially when it came to travel. He would be checking confirmations again, even though he'd already checked them twice, making sure the seats were still business class, making sure the hotel still said suite, making sure everything reflected the version of himself he intended to present. Cambria would be slower, selecting outfits carefully, choosing which bag looked the most international, wanting to arrive looking like the trip had already changed her. My phone buzzed once. Then again, I didn't reach for it. A third buzz came and I finally turned it over. Byron. Wheels up soon. Another message followed immediately. She's excited. And then, like a ribbon tied neatly at the end, "Thanks again for everything." I stared at that sentence. Not thanks for raising me. Not thanks for supporting us. Just thanks for everything, the way you thank a service that delivered on time. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it turn into tears. I wasn't losing something. I was removing something. I walked into my living room and looked at the framed photographs lining the wall. Byron as a boy, gap-toothed and proud. Byron at graduation, arm around my shoulders. Byron on his wedding day, smiling like he was stepping into something clean. The man leaving for Dubai wasn't the boy in those frames. The boy would have defended his mother. The man had learned to stay silent and call it peace. Another buzz. Cambria this time. "We're headed out." Pray for safe travels. There was a photo attached. I didn't open it. Pray for safe travels. As if prayer was what carried them. Not my accounts. Not my status. Not my card on file. I wiped down a counter that didn't need wiping. Rinsed a cup that was already clean. Kept my hands moving because stillness lets the ache grow loud. Another buzz. We're at the airport now. I stood still for a long moment. I hadn't planned to go. There was no invitation with my name on it, no seat beside them, no role for me in the photos. But something in that final message shifted the air in my chest. Not anger, not revenge, just confirmation. They believed everything was intact. They believed confirmation meant permanence. They believed access meant ownership. I picked up my keys. I didn't rush. I didn't announce it. I simply locked my front door and walked to my car. Across town, or Byron was probably stepping toward the check-in counter with the same confidence he'd carried at dinner. He didn't know the system had already updated. He didn't know privileges follow the name that earned them. And he didn't know I was on my way. When I pulled into the airport parking structure, my phone buzzed again. Boarding soon. I turned off the engine and stepped out. And the first thing that hit me when I stepped into the terminal was the temperature. Airport air always feels too cold, too dry, like it was designed to keep emotions from lingering. I hadn't planned to come, but when Byron texted, "We're at the airport now," something in my chest tightened. Not hope, not softness. Instinct. The kind that wakes up when a mother understands she's about to watch her child collide with a truth he's been avoiding. I moved through the crowd without rushing, composed, knees steady, purse tucked close. I didn't come to save him. I came to see who he was when saving wasn't available. I spotted them near the service counter. They weren't smiling anymore. The performance had already cracked. Byron stood rigid, boarding passes in one hand, phone in the other. Cambria was beside him, lips pressed thin, eyes scanning his face instead of the screen. The earlier confusion had shifted into something heavier, and I stepped closer just as the agent behind the counter spoke again. "Sir," she said calmly, tapping her monitor, "the upgrade certificates attached to this reservation were removed yesterday. The booking reverted to its original fare class." Yesterday. Cambria turned slowly toward him. "Removed?" she asked, and this time the word didn't sound confused. It sounded precise. Byron's jaw flexed. "That doesn't make sense," he said quickly. "We had confirmation." "Yes," the agent replied evenly. But those certificates are no longer active." The agent's tone didn't accuse. It didn't sympathize. It simply reported. Policy. Byron forced a tight smile. "Fine," he said, a little too fast. "We'll just handle it." He pivoted, pride moving ahead of reason. They walked toward the lounge entrance. I followed at a distance. The attendant scanned the boarding passes. "Membership?" she asked politely. "It's under my family account," Byron said, lifting his chin slightly. He is like the word family would carry weight. The attendant typed. Paused. "The elite status tied to this benefit belongs to the primary member," she said. "Is the primary member traveling today?" Byron hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "No," he admitted. "Then lounge access doesn't apply," she said, sliding the passes back. "Access requires either qualifying status or class of service." Cambria's shoulders stiffened. She didn't look at the attendant. She looked at Byron. And not confusion. Assessment. He had promised her a world, and the system was quietly informing her that he did not own it. They moved away from the lounge entrance without speaking. The velvet rope fantasy dissolved behind them. Byron adjusted his jacket like that could restore dignity. "It's fine," he muttered. "We'll sort it at the desk." They approached baggage services. He placed his carry-on down with controlled force and slid his card forward without looking at it. That card, or the one that used to carry my name above his. Cambria finally saw me then. Her eyes shifted past Byron's shoulder, locked on mine, not relief, not warmth, recognition. Byron followed her gaze. The color left his face in a way that wasn't subtle. The agent looked at her screen, then at the card, then back at her screen again. There was a small pause. Not dramatic, just procedural. "Sir," she said carefully, "this card has been declined." Silence. Byron blinked once. "That's not possible," he said, voice lower now. The agent typed again. "It also shows authorized user privileges were removed yesterday. The primary account holder would need to reinstate access." Yesterday. Cambria turned toward him slowly. Removed, reinstated. Primary account holder. Words he had never needed to understand before. He didn't look at the agent anymore. He looked at me. And for the first time that morning, he understood that confirmation does not mean permanence. Access does not mean ownership, and proximity does not mean control. I didn't step forward. I didn't speak. I simply held his eyes. The agent waited. Cambria waited. The system had already spoken. Now it was his turn. The agent slid the cards back across the counter. Not harshly, not dramatically, just professionally. "Do you have another form of payment for the baggage charges?" she asked. The question wasn't cruel, it was procedural. But procedure has a way of exposing people who've been performing. Byron didn't reach for the cards immediately. He stared at them. 2 rectangles, 2 reminders. Behind him, the line shifted slightly. A suitcase wheel scraped. Someone exhaled softly. No one openly stared, but attention has a sound in crowded places, and it was settling around them. Cambria stepped half an inch farther back. Not obvious, but enough. So Byron finally grabbed the cards and shoved them into his wallet too quickly. He pulled out a third one, older, less polished, and ran it without comment. This one went through. The agent nodded and printed the receipt. The difference was small but loud. This wasn't the card he had used to promise her luxury. This wasn't the card that opened lounges. This was the card that kept things basic. Cambria's voice came low and precise. Why didn't the other one work? Not emotional? Not dramatic. Just surgical. Byron swallowed. "It's probably a fraud alert," he muttered. "Happens with travel." Cambria didn't blink. "But the upgrades?" she asked quietly. Byron didn't answer, because upgrades don't disappear from fraud alerts. The agent handed over the baggage tags and boarding passes. "Boarding will begin in 40 minutes, she said, neutral, uninvolved. And just like that, the system had moved on. But Cambria hadn't, and she looked at Byron with a new kind of stillness, the kind that measures a man instead of admiring him. "You said everything was handled," she said softly. "It is," he replied quickly, too quickly. "It's just technical." Technical. The word hung in the air like a weak defense. Cambria's gaze shifted and landed on me. This time it wasn't surprise, it wasn't confusion, it was calculation. She understood something now, not fully, but enough. Byron followed her eyes again, and he didn't look shocked anymore. He looked exposed. That's the difference between embarrassment and collapse. Embarrassment is noise. Collapse is understanding. He stepped toward me, lowering his voice. "What did you do?" he asked. Not loudly, not accusing, just tight. I didn't step forward. I didn't step back. "I adjusted access," I said calmly. Cambria's eyes sharpened. "Access," she repeated. Byron's jaw flexed. "You didn't have to do this here." There it was. Not why, not how, but here. As if the location was the offense. "You thanked me for clearing upgrades," I said quietly. I cleared them. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was heavy. Cambria's shoulders straightened. "So there's no business class?" she asked Byron. He didn't answer. "So there's no lounge?" she pressed. Still no answer. She let out one small breath. Not anger, not tears. Disappointment. The kind that doesn't forgive easily. Behind them, the boarding announcement echoed faintly through the terminal. Passengers began lining up. Life continued. Byron ran a hand over his face and looked at me again, and this time the pride was gone. "You could have just told me," he said. I held his gaze. "You could have defended me," I replied. Cambria flinched slightly at that. He looked between us, between the woman who built the foundation and the woman he built the promise around. For the first time that morning, he wasn't performing, and he was choosing. Cambria adjusted the strap of her bag. "Are we boarding or not?" she asked flatly. Not to me, to him. And in that question was the real humiliation, not the declined card, not the lost upgrades, but the realization that he had promised luxury he did not control. The final boarding call began to echo through the gate area. Byron stood still for half a second too long. Then he turned back toward the counter. And this time, he wasn't trying to look important. Only he was trying to look adequate. Byron didn't look at Cambria when his phone started buzzing. He didn't even pretend the buzzing was a random notification. His eyes move the way they move when a man is cornered. Quick, calculating, searching for the one person he knows still has the power to change the outcome. The screen lit his palm in a hard rectangle of light, and for a second he just stared at it like it might tell him what words could undo what had already been done. Cambria leaned slightly toward him, close enough to see the name on the screen, and her mouth pressed into a thin line that could have been patience if it weren't so sharp. When Byron finally answered, he stepped away from the counter like he didn't want the agent hearing what he was about to say, like privacy could give him back dignity. I didn't let the phone ring long. I'd been watching him from a distance, watching the way his shoulders folded when the truth stopped cooperating. I'd watch Cambria's eyes change from surprise to suspicion to something colder. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt a strange, quiet grief, like watching a child you love touch a hot stove after you warned him not to. The call connected, and Byron's voice came out lower than usual, stripped of its polish. "Ma," he said, and the way he said it told me he wanted me to remember the boy version of him, not the man who stayed silent when his wife called me a burden. I didn't respond right away, or I let the silence stretch just enough to make him feel it, not as punishment, as truth. In the background, I could hear the airport, announcements, rolling luggage, the soft murmur of people moving around their problem without being part of it. Byron swallowed. "Ma, something's wrong with the card," he said, and he tried to make it sound like a technical issue, a glitch, something outside of responsibility. "It isn't wrong," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. When it came out even like water poured into a glass, there was a pause on his end, a small inhale like he was trying to decide whether to play dumb or play desperate. "They're saying I'm not authorized," he said. "They're saying it was revoked yesterday." "I adjusted access," I replied. 3 words, no speech, no explanation. Byron's breath caught. "Why would you do that?" he asked, and I heard the edge in his voice, the edge of entitlement dressed as confusion. On the other side of him, I could see Cambria watching his face while he talked. She wasn't grabbing the phone. She wasn't crying. She stood with her arms loosely folded, posture straight, as if she was trying to look unbothered while her world tilted. Her eyes kept darting to the counter, to the agent, to Byron, like she was mapping the humiliation and deciding who would pay for it. "Because I needed clarity," I said. Byron's voice sharpened. "Clarity about what?" "Ma, we're at the airport. Cambria's right here. This is her birthday trip." I didn't let him pull me into the urgency of his embarrassment. Urgency was the tool he'd always used to get my help, create a crisis and then act like my support was the solution. "You're adults," I said calmly. "I trust you'll manage." He went quiet for half a beat, stunned by the fact that I wasn't rushing to fix it. Then the panic rose, pushing through his pride. "Manage how?" he hissed. "We're trying to pay for baggage. They took the upgrades. On the lounge, everything's gone. People are staring." Cambria's head turned sharply at the word people, not because she cared about the baggage, because she cared about the watching. Her mouth moved like she wanted to speak, but she didn't. She just stood there and waited for Byron to either save the day or admit he couldn't. "Byron," I said, and my voice softened only in the way a mother's voice softens when she's choosing her words carefully, not when she's surrendering. 3 days ago, and I heard Cambria call me a burden. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of him remembering, full of him calculating, full of Cambria's eyes widening because she knew exactly what she'd said and exactly who had heard it. Byron didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend he didn't know. His breath turned uneven like he was realizing the moment had been building longer than this airport counter. "Ma," he started, and his voice changed on that syllable, slipping into the tone he used when he wanted forgiveness without owning the damage. "I thought about what she said," I continued, steady, and I decided to reduce the weight. Cambria's face tightened like she'd been slapped without being touched. Byron's jaw worked, a muscle jumping near his ear. He lowered his voice further, almost a plea. "We can talk about this later," he said quickly. "Please, just help me right now, just for today." For today, when the same phrase that had carried them for 2 years. Just for today, just this once, just until things settle. I looked at Byron across the terminal, watched the way he stood there with his phone pressed to his ear like it was a lifeline, watched Cambria's posture beside him, still, rigid, waiting. "No," I said quietly. Not harsh, not dramatic, just final. "Not today." Byron's throat bobbed. "So you're really going to do this to us?" "I'm going to do this for me," I answered. "And for you, if you let it teach you." His eyes flashed, wounded pride trying to mask fear. "I have to go," I said, and I meant it. I ended the call without slamming anything, without a final speech, without giving him one more chance to twist my boundary into cruelty. I slipped my phone back into my purse and stood there in the airport noise, calm as stone, while Byron stared at his screen like it had betrayed him. I turned and walked toward the exit. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Because the truth didn't need to run. Behind me, Cambria finally spoke, low and sharp, and Byron's shoulders flinched as if her words landed harder than mine. When I got home from the airport, I didn't make tea. I didn't sit down. I didn't even breathe the way a tired woman wants to breathe after a public morning. I went straight to my bedroom closet and pulled down the black folder I keep behind the storage boxes no one ever touches. The folder isn't dramatic. It isn't a secret. It's simply what happens when you've lived long enough to understand that love without structure turns into access without respect. I set it on the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Paper, trust documents, account summaries, signatures that meant something. Byron texted me twice that afternoon. Short, sharp, frustrated. Cambria didn't text at all. That silence told me everything I needed to know about what was unfolding between them. I didn't respond. And I wasn't interested in emotion. I was interested in structure. The next morning, I called my attorney's office. Not family, not a friend. The same firm that helped me organize everything after my husband died. The firm that believes clarity is more important than comfort. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. "Ms. Harding," she said warmly. "I need the earliest consultation available," I replied. She didn't ask questions. People like me don't request urgency without cause. And I chose the soonest appointment and hung up. On the day of the meeting, I dressed in neutral colors, clean lines, no sentimental jewelry. When you're making structural decisions, emotion has no seat at the table. My attorney greeted me calmly. "This is urgent?" she asked. "It is." She didn't ask for drama. She asked for facts. I gave them. Not the insult word for word, not the airport scene, or just the core truth. My son had grown comfortable treating my financial infrastructure as if it were communal property, and I needed to reassess exposure. Her expression didn't change. It sharpened. "Is your son currently named as a primary beneficiary under your trust?" she asked. "Yes." "And does he have any present authority?" "No, but he has access assumptions." She nodded. "Access and inheritance are not the same thing," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm here." She reviewed my documents carefully. When she finished, she closed the folder gently. "If your concern is immediate risk," she said, "we can notify the trustee and suspend discretionary distributions pending amendment. That prevents any unexpected movement while revisions are drafted. Not dramatic, procedural." "And the amendment?" I asked. "We revised the trust terms," she continued. Then you can convert future distributions to structured disbursements rather than lump sums, add spendthrift protections, appoint third-party oversight if necessary, clarify that no present authority exists beyond what you explicitly grant. That language felt solid, not emotional, solid. The goal, she added, is not to remove him as your son. It's to prevent misuse of expectation. Expectation. That was the word. Can we begin drafting immediately? I asked. Yes, she replied. Or we'll circulate draft language within days. Nothing becomes final until you execute it. Room. That's what she had just given me. Not revenge. Room. When I walked out of the office, the sunlight felt sharper. Not warmer. Sharper. Because clarity cuts. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. Byron. Voicemail. I didn't play it. I drove home with both hands steady on the wheel, understanding something I should have recognized sooner. Generosity without structure teaches entitlement. Or by the time I pulled into my driveway, I already knew the opening clause would begin with accountability. Not punishment, accountability. And this time, it would be written in ink. They came back quieter than they left. Not in the tired, satisfied way people return from a dream trip with new memories and softened faces, but in the tight, brittle way people return when the dream refuses to cooperate. And I knew they were home before Byron even knocked, because I saw the rideshare stop outside my window and watched him step out with his carry-on like it weighed more than clothes. Cambria followed behind him, sunglasses on even though the sky was cloudy, posture stiff like she didn't want the neighborhood to read her face. There were no shopping bags, no excited chatter, no "we made it" glow. Just two people moving like they'd been corrected in public and didn't yet know how to speak about it in private. Byron's knock was soft at first, then slightly firmer, like he remembered he used to have authority in my house. I opened the door before he could knock again. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply looked at them the way I've learned to look at grown people when they arrive carrying consequences. Cambria didn't greet me the way she used to. No Miss Avell, no hug, no performance. She stepped into my entryway as if my home was a place she had to pass through, not a place she respected. Byron's eyes were tired, but not from travel, from tension, from the kind of quiet arguing that happens in hotel rooms with thin walls. "You're back early," I said. Neutral. A fact, not a question. Byron cleared his throat. "We had to cut it short," he replied. Cambria's jaw tightened. She slid her suitcase upright and said, "Flight's changed." Her voice had that polished edge again, clean words meant to cover messy truth. I let the silence sit a moment, long enough for them to feel it. Then I stepped aside and walked back toward my living room, leaving the door open behind them. If they wanted to talk, they would follow. And they did. Byron came in first, like he always had when he was trying to keep peace. Cambria trailed behind him, taking in my home with an expression that looked like she was searching for something to criticize. She didn't find anything obvious. My house has always been tidy, in a way that doesn't beg for praise. Byron sat down carefully as if the couch might accuse him. Cambria stayed standing, arms folded, weight shifted onto one hip. That stance wasn't comfort. It was distance. "How was it?" I asked, still neutral, still giving them room to choose honesty. Byron opened his mouth, then closed it, and Cambria answered for him. "It was not what we expected," she said, and the pause between the words was heavy. Byron exhaled through his nose, and for the first time I saw the exhaustion in his eyes clearly. "Ma," he began softly, "we didn't even get to do half of what we planned." I nodded once, as if acknowledging the weather. I said. Cambria's eyes sharpened at my calm. "We weren't in business," she said suddenly. No, and her voice rose just enough to reveal the wound without turning it into a scene. "We were in economy, on a long flight, for my birthday." Byron flinched at the way she said my birthday, like it was a debt someone had failed to pay. "Cambria," he started. "No," she cut in, and that single word carried the quiet fury of a woman whose image had been threatened. "No, Byron, don't Cambria me. You told me we were upgraded. You said you handled it." Byron's face tightened. "Now, I thought I did," he said, and his voice had the kind of defensive weariness that comes after days of trying to calm someone who doesn't want calm. "I saw the confirmations." Cambria turned her head toward me then, and her gaze was direct in a way it hadn't been before. "We couldn't even use the lounge," she added, as if listing charges. "Do you know what that feels like? Watching other people walk in while you stand outside like you don't belong?" I didn't respond. I didn't correct her. I didn't take the bait. My silence made the room feel louder. Byron rubbed his palms together slowly, a nervous habit he had as a boy when he'd broken something and wanted it fixed before anyone saw. "And the hotel," Cambria continued, voice tightening. "The suite wasn't there. They put us in a standard room. We showed up like fools." Byron's jaw worked. "I tried to fix it," he muttered. "With what?" Cambria snapped quietly, not shouting, just slicing. "With what money, Byron? With what card?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Byron's eyes dropped to the floor, and in that moment, I saw it. How the airport humiliation didn't stop at the counter. It followed them onto the plane. It sat between them in the cramped seats. It ate at Cambria every time she looked around and saw that her birthday trip didn't look like the one she'd been promised. It pressed on Byron every time he realized he couldn't handle it without borrowing my authority. Then Byron finally lifted his head and looked at me, voice low. "Ma," he started, and his eyes had that same plea from the terminal. "Can we talk?" I raised my hand slightly, not to silence him aggressively, just to slow the room down. "You already talked," I said calmly. "At the airport." Cambria's mouth opened, then shut. Byron swallowed. I leaned forward just a little, enough to shift the power without raising my voice. "Do you still believe," I asked softly, each word measured, "that I'm a burden?" Cambria's eyes flickered. Her throat worked like she wanted to answer and couldn't find a version that wouldn't indict her. Byron stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock in my hallway ticking like a heartbeat. And when Cambria finally looked up at me, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Cambria stayed silent long enough for the quiet to become its own kind of answer. Her eyes didn't soften, and they didn't harden either. They flickered, like she was searching for a sentence that could make her look right without making her look cruel. Byron's hands were clasped so tightly, his knuckles turned pale, and the sight of that made something heavy settle behind my ribs. Not anger. Something older than anger. The realization that I had been watching the wrong problem. I had thought Cambria's word was the wound, but the longer the silence stretched, the clearer it became. Cambria's mouth wasn't the only betrayal. Byron's quiet was. Cambria finally moved first. She lifted her suitcase handle and dragged it a few inches, as if she needed something physical to do with the energy building inside her. "I'm not doing this," she said flatly, voice low and controlled. It wasn't apology. It wasn't denial. It was avoidance, dressed in dignity. She didn't look at Byron when she said it. She looked past him, toward the door, and as if escape was the only way to keep her image intact. Byron's head snapped up. "Cambria," he warned softly, and his voice carried a new tone, tired but edged. Cambria's mouth twisted. "Don't," she said. "Don't act like this is all on me." She turned toward him then, and that's when the private damage showed through. "You let me believe you handled it," she continued, and her polite cruelty was aimed at him now, not me. What, you let me believe you could afford what you promised? Byron's jaw clenched. I didn't lie, he said, but the protest sounded weak even to him. Cambria laughed once, bitter and small. You didn't tell the whole truth, she replied. That's a lie with better manners. The room tightened. I could feel Byron's pride fighting to stand between them like a shield, but the shield was cracked. I watched him take a slow breath, and when he spoke again, it wasn't to Cambria. It was to me. Ma, he said, voice lower, heavier. Can you give us a minute? Cambria's eyes widened slightly. Surprised he was asking for privacy in my house. That alone told me how the balance had shifted. She didn't argue. She picked up her purse from the table like it was an act of self-respect and walked toward the guest room without another word, heels quiet against my hardwood, door closing with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. Byron remained standing for a moment, as if he didn't trust his legs to hold him if he sat. Then he lowered himself onto the edge of my couch and leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped, like a man praying without believing. He stared at the floor. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were wet, but his face was tight, like he was trying not to let the emotion make him look childish. I didn't know you hurt her, he began. I waited. His throat worked. But it wasn't the first time, he admitted, and his voice cracked on the word first. The air in my lungs felt like it paused. I didn't speak. I didn't prompt him. I just watched him and let him sit in the truth he'd been avoiding. Byron rubbed his hands together slowly, the old habit returning. She's said it before, he continued quieter. Not like that. Not to her friends, but to me. When we argued, when she was stressed, she'd say things like, "Your mom acts like she owns you," or "You can't even breathe without her money." He swallowed hard, eyes dropping again. And sometimes she'd say it straight, he whispered, that you were a burden. My chest tightened, but I didn't let the pain turn into sound. I had learned too late that sound can be used against you. Byron's voice rushed now, as if he wanted to spill everything before I could decide what to do with it. I tried to stop her, he said. And then I heard the lie in the effort. I tried to calm it down. I'd tell her you meant well, that you helped us because you wanted to. But you didn't shut it down, I said softly. Not a shout, not an accusation, a fact. Byron flinched like the words had weight. I didn't want to fight, he confessed. Every time I pushed back, she'd say I was choosing you over her. She'd cry, then she'd get quiet for days. And I just wanted peace. Peace. That word is how grown people dress cowardice when they don't want to look in the mirror. I nodded once, slow. So you let her keep saying it, I said. And you kept taking what you needed from me. Byron's eyes filled again. I wasn't trying to use you, he said quickly, and the desperation in his voice made him sound young. I didn't know how to fix it. You didn't fix it, I replied, still calm. You managed it. His lips parted, but no defense came out, and he stared at me the way he stared at the counter in the airport, like he was waiting for someone else to make the world right again. And in that moment, a quiet clarity settled over me, clean and cold. This wasn't one insult overheard at the wrong time. This was a pattern Byron had been tolerating while letting me fund the comfort that kept his marriage afloat. I stood slowly, and Byron's eyes followed me, wary now. I need you to hear me, I said, my voice steady. I am not your safety net. I am your mother. Byron nodded fast, too fast, as if agreement could erase what he'd confessed. I know, he whispered. I know. I looked at him for a long moment, letting the silence press on the part of him that still wanted rescue. Then I said the truth out loud, the one that changed what came next. I have to decide. I told him quietly, whether I'm raising a man or funding a boy. Byron came back 2 days later alone. That alone told me more than any apology could. Now, when a man stops bringing his wife into the room, it's either because he's choosing separation or because he's finally learning the difference between partnership and permission. He stood on my porch without his usual confidence, hands empty, shoulders slightly rounded like he'd been carrying something heavy that didn't fit in a suitcase. His eyes looked tired, but cleaner than they did the day he confessed. Not relieved, just stripped down to what was real. "I didn't tell her I was coming," he said as soon as I opened the door, voice low. I stepped aside and let him in. "I figured," I replied. He followed me into the living room and paused at the pictures on my wall, the same ones I'd looked at the morning of their departure. This time he didn't glance at them like decoration. He stared like he was finally noticing the boy inside the frames. Then he sat careful again, like the couch might judge him. "I owe you a real apology," he began. I didn't soften. I didn't harden. I just waited. Because waiting is how you find out whether a person is sorry or simply scared. Byron swallowed. "I'm sorry I let her speak about you like that," he said, and the words came out plain. No excuses, no jokes. "And I'm sorry I stayed quiet." That second sentence was the one that mattered. Silence is the betrayal that likes to wear clean clothes. I nodded once. "Why?" I asked. Not angry, not curious, direct. Byron's eyes dipped. "And because I wanted peace," he admitted, and he said it like it tasted bitter now. "And because I liked the life we had." He glanced up quickly as if confessing comfort made him look weak. "I told myself it wasn't hurting you because you never complained." "I didn't complain because I didn't know I was being discussed like an inconvenience," I said calmly. His jaw tightened. "I know," he whispered. "I know." The quiet between us felt different than it had before. This wasn't an argument. And it was a turning point. He wasn't asking for the card. He wasn't asking for Dubai to be fixed. He was asking, without saying it, for a way back into the version of himself he could respect. "I'm not here to ask you for money," Byron said quickly, as if he could read my thoughts. "I'm here to ask you what you need from me." That question landed softer than all his panic had at the airport. It was the first time he'd asked me what I needed instead of assuming I needed to help. And I sat down across from him and let my voice stay measured. "I need accountability," I said. "Not performance, not promises, accountability." Byron nodded slowly. "Tell me," he said. I reached for the folder on my side table, the same black folder that had traveled with me into my attorney's office. I didn't open it dramatically. I simply placed it between us like a boundary you could see. Byron's eyes flicked to it, then back to mine. He didn't flinch, but his throat moved, and he knew what paper could do. "I met with my attorney," I told him. Byron inhaled quietly. "Okay," he said. "My estate will remain in trust," I continued, watching his face carefully. "Not because I don't love you, because love without structure is what put us here." His eyes tightened, but he stayed silent. "There will be no direct lump sum access," I said, keeping my tone plain. "No one-day payday that anyone can spend like a prize." Byron nodded once, slow. "Distributions will be conditional," I went on, "tied to behavior and stability. Respect is not a feeling, it's a practice. If you want the benefits of what I built, you will live like someone worthy of it." Byron's lips parted, but he didn't interrupt. "And you will complete financial counseling," I added. "Not because you're stupid, because you've been financially careless in the one way that matters most, by confusing access with entitlement." That one finally pierced him, and his shoulders sank slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition. "I understand," he said quietly. I leaned forward just a fraction, letting the power sit in my voice without raising it. "You will build your own independence," I said. No more cards in my name. No more borrowing my status. No more using my support to prove something to your wife. His jaw clenched at that last part, and I saw the shame flicker in his eyes. I shouldn't have done that, he murmured. No, I agreed. You shouldn't have. He rubbed his palms together once, then stopped himself like he was trying to unlearn his boy habits in real time. What about Cambria? He asked softly, and that question carried fear. Fear of what she would say, fear of what she would demand, fear of the storm waiting at home. I held his gaze. Cambria is your wife, I said, but my legacy is not her entitlement. Byron swallowed. She's going to say you're punishing her, he admitted. I'm protecting myself, I replied. And I'm protecting you from becoming the kind of man who needs a woman's approval more than he needs his own integrity. The words hung between us, heavy but clean. Byron looked down at the folder, then back up, and for the first time in days, his eyes held something steadier than panic. If I agree, he said slowly, is there a path back? I didn't answer right away. I let him sit in the discomfort of not knowing, because discomfort is where growth starts. Then I spoke, and my voice was quiet but unmovable. The inheritance isn't gone, I said. It's conditional. The first change didn't announce itself with a speech. It showed up the way real change always shows up, quietly in the details people can't fake for long. A month after the airport, Byron stopped wearing that watch that caught the light at dinner like a signal. He still showed up clean and pressed, but the shine was gone. Not because he was falling apart. Oh, it's because he was finally living inside what he could carry without borrowing my shoulders. He called me one afternoon and didn't ask for anything. That alone felt unfamiliar. We met with a counselor, he said, voice steady. Not defensive, not dramatic, just reporting. Financial counseling, like you said. I didn't praise him like a child. Good, I replied. He exhaled softly as if my calm approval was heavier than applause. It's humbling, he admitted. It should be, I said. And I meant it without cruelty. Humility is what happens when reality finally reaches the part of you that used to hide behind convenience. Cambria didn't call for weeks. When she finally did, her tone was careful, polished, and tight, like she was stepping across glass without wanting to admit the floor was broken. Miss Avell, she said, and the old performance tried to return, but it didn't have the same power. Avell is fine, I answered. There was a pause. Okay, she said. And in that single word I heard the shift. She could no longer lean on the distance of formality to keep control. Byron told me about the trust changes, she continued, voice still measured. I just want you to know we're working on things. Working on things meant nothing if it didn't show up in behavior. I'm glad, I replied. Cambria waited, as if expecting more. An apology from me, a reassurance, a softening. When none came, she cleared her throat. We refinanced the condo, she said, and the sentence sounded like it pained her to say it out loud. Refinancing is what people do when they can no longer pretend their monthly life is sustainable. Byron spoke about it later in a separate call, quieter and more honest. It lowered the payment, he said. We cut back. Cut back. Those two words had never belonged in Cambria's vocabulary the way Dubai did. Byron told me they'd canceled 2 subscriptions they'd been paying for without thinking. He told me they stopped eating out on weekdays. He told me Cambria sold a few designer pieces. She wasn't wearing anyway. The way he said it let me know she had argued about it first, but the pieces still left the closet. That's what mattered. The biggest shift was the one no one could post. Byron stopped using my credit entirely. No tapping, no swiping, no emergencies. He didn't ask to be added back. He didn't even hint. When his car needed repairs, he handled it. And when Cambria wanted something expensive, she waited, or she didn't get it. Their life didn't collapse. It recalibrated. and the recalibration revealed what I had suspected all along. The lifestyle had been louder than their love. Without my support cushioning them, they had to face each other more honestly. The tension between them didn't disappear like a movie ending. It shifted locations. It showed up in the way Byron's voice got quieter when he mentioned Cambria's name. Now it showed up in the way Cambria started attending counseling sessions for communication, which is what people call it when pride finally admits it needs help. It showed up in the fact that their Dubai photos never appeared. No glowing carousel of luxury, no birthday captions dripping with gratitude. The absence of those photos became its own statement in the family. People noticed without asking. People understood without being told. And the most public moment didn't happen at an airport or a restaurant. It happened at a small family gathering 2 months later. An aunt's birthday, a living room full of laughter and music low in the background. I walked in, and Cambria stood up immediately. Not slowly, not reluctantly, immediately. She came to me with both hands open, no phone in sight, no audience performance, just a quiet, deliberate respect. "Yvel," she said, and my name sounded different in her mouth. Careful, yes, but also sober. "I'm glad you came." I nodded and let the moment be what it was. Byron hovered nearby, watching, and in his face I saw the kind of fear that comes when a man is waiting to see if the women in his life will destroy each other. I didn't destroy anyone. I simply held my boundary like a woman holding her spine. Later that evening, Byron found me near the kitchen and spoke softly. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. That because gratitude without specificity can be another form of performance. He swallowed. "For making me grow up," he admitted, "even when I hated you for it." I studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I didn't do it to hurt you," I said. "I did it to stop hurting myself." Byron's eyes shone, but he didn't cry. He just stood there like a man learning how to carry his own weight. When I drove home that night, the road felt quieter than it used to. Not lonely. Quiet. The peaceful in a way peace is supposed to be. Earned, not negotiated. I hadn't destroyed my son. I had simply withdrawn leverage and let reality do what it always does when it's finally allowed into a room. It tells the truth. They thought removing me from the picture would make them powerful. They never realized I was the frame holding it together.